Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Akil, and in this episode we cover how security has evolved throughout the years, how to build resilient organizations and software, and how much of a people component is actually there in the field. Joining me today is Jelle Niemantsverdriet. He has one of the coolest titles I have ever seen, National Security Officer over at Microsoft, and this was a blast of an episode. Enjoy!
Beyond Coding.
I was wondering, because I really want to touch on kind of security, how it is nowadays, but also I'm very curious, since you've been in the field for a long, long time, how you've seen security evolve. Because I have an opinion, but my opinion is kind of from the last, let's say, 6-7 years when I've been in this field, and your experience kind of goes even before that. I feel like security is less of a hurdle than I feel like people had this notion of, let's say, in the previous few years. And it's more so seamlessly integrated, but it's still like a core component, and I don't think it's ever going to go away as a discipline.
Yeah, maybe to immediately pick up on that last one, that's. I don't think it should go away as an area to focus on. I'm always a little bit playing with the idea on whether it should be a separate discipline or not, or if it actually should be more a matter of quality almost. Because right now it still feels a little bit, and I agree with you, it changed a lot in recent years. But it still feels a little bit like there is this, it is in many cases still an afterthought. It is still, we build something and then there's other people who look at securing the thing. Or it is something like we deploy something in our organization for our colleagues to use. And then there's a security team that tells you that there is one way to use it, which is not recommended, because there's another way, which is the secure way to use it. And then they're going to do awareness training to teach you and send you fake phishing emails to test you. And I'd like to think that should ultimately be more integrated, more a notion of, we're going to build something and it needs to be secure out of the box. So it doesn't really make sense that that's a separate team. But really getting those disciplines more closer together and more entangled, so to say.
I think that makes sense. Do you think it's always been kind of how it's grown organically, where people would build stuff and people would focus on making it secure, and that's kind of how it's grown? And now maybe they're moving a bit towards each other, but they're still separate?
That's probably how it started. And I think I'm sometimes a little bit critical to my own field. I think we have also traditionally not been trying really hard to integrate, and maybe even because we have, to a certain extent, glorified the hacking element of security. So it's always fun and nice to try and break something, and you see that in many cases that's the field or the part of the field where people want to move into. And again, that's getting better. But it was traditionally always like, I want to be an ethical hacker or a penetration tester or do red teaming and break stuff. And I still think that's an incredibly valuable component of security, but it has always been a little bit the notion of, if you do it wrong, you are sort of the annoying kid on the playground and you've just built a very nice tower with Lego or blocks or whatever. And here comes the sort of the schoolyard bully, knocks over your tower and doesn't even help you pick up the pieces or rebuild it. And to a certain extent, that's and of course I'm exaggerating maybe a little bit and notwithstanding the good examples, but that has a little bit been the approach for security. You build it, we test it, we point out 10, 15, 20 different things and do a little bit of a priority ranking. Good luck. And that's... And again, it's getting better, but I think that hasn't helped traditionally to get this more into an integrated notion. We should really, I guess, almost admire that it's fun to build something that is, not only easy to use but also secure, and that doesn't require a lengthy manual to explain how to do things in a secure way. That's where I think security should aim to position itself a bit more broadly, and especially a little bit earlier in the development phase, so to say.
It has kind of shifted, I feel like, because from my side, if I build something, and I don't know if this is kind of the, let's say, the expertise of people or also the technology that we use nowadays, but I really feel ownership of that. So if someone were to misuse it, let's say, and steal data or have like significant impact on the organization of the software that I just created with my team, I would feel like disastrous, basically.
Yeah, it almost hurts
personally.
your personal pride almost. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it could be an ego thing, it could be an ownership thing, but really I take pride in the thing that I do, and I want it to be resilient and I want it to be useful.
Yeah.
And if people then misuse it, I take that as that's kind of on me or on the team, basically.
Yeah.
That would be hard. It's never happened, but that feeling of ownership, I think, is now, at least with me, let's say.
Yeah.
And I don't want to generalize too much.
No, but I think that's exactly I guess the kind of thinking and well, almost feeling maybe, because that's also a little bit how you explain it. That I think would be great if more, development teams or system admin teams would have that. Like, almost this. Yeah, it feels almost a little bit like this professional pride on. This is our thing, and we want people to enjoy using it. We want them to be able to put it out there, regardless whether you are computer literate or maybe a kid, without worry that it's going to be hacked. But also, I think, and that's where security could define itself also in a broader way. Also, without, I guess not breaking that trust between whoever built it and whoever is using the product. So making that you will look after whatever data that the object program, whatever it is, might be holding, that you're not doing and using any sort of dark patterns in the user interface. I think it's really those things where we should ultimately maybe even see security as more of a the broader trust topic, and not also maybe not have a chief security officer, but a chief trust officer who has this broader perspective on how can we build things that our customers or our employees can actually really trust.
Yeah. I think that's, I like that way of thinking about it, that it's more so about trust rather than it being secure, right? It's trust both of the end users as well as the people that are creating it. Because with the technologies that I'm leveraging now, I feel like within my team, the total cost of ownership has gone down significantly, just by virtue of not having as much operational overhead, by really being able to focus on business problems, by taking solutions off the shelf cloud natively, let's say. I can do a lot of things with a very, very small team. Yeah. And things are more so secure out of the box. Like you still have patterns within your programming, but still you have tools for that do analyses, and you accommodate for that nowadays. So I feel like we can do a lot. I feel very much more confident, and I feel that I have a trust in my team, basically, by virtue of having that expertise within there. And people even now, I have colleagues that have come from a security background, a very specific focused background, and that now label themselves as, let's say, secure software engineers, where they leverage their previous experience and they're now software engineers, and they always take that with them. So it's very much integrated in smaller subset of teams. But when there's a bigger organization where you feel like you're a cog of this overarching team and you have security on the one hand, ops on the other hand, you're in development, then it just becomes these silos. And then people think about, let's say, their responsibilities and, that's their responsibility now, this is mine, that's the securities. And then I do feel like maybe trust is not there as much. You trust in your own capabilities then, but maybe not so in the other departments, because that's their responsibility. Yeah,
and I think especially also with those silos, or sometimes we think they're layers, right? We always talk about layers of defense, but I think they sometimes indeed become layers of excuse or layers of slowness, because indeed it's this notion of, okay, I built this, and I should probably think a little bit about security, but hey, we still have somebody doing a penetration test, and hey, we still have the second line of defense, and we have internal audit, and we have so it almost takes away a little bit of that overall ownership indeed.
You don't have to do it.
And I think also, circling back to what you were saying about modern tools, I think there you probably in a little bit of a good space, I guess, where you can really benefit from what I sometimes call this industrial revolution in IT, right? Where you can now use these modern tools, whether it's cloud or supporting environments, to really do things in a consistent, in a repeatable way, without having to worry about carrying a 19-inch server, screwing it into a rack, putting an operating system on it, configuring it, all those things of the past. I think that has indeed created a lot of potentially a great foundation to build on, but not many or more and more organizations, but not everybody is there yet, or they are a little bit in a sort of mix between, of course, where you have still a lot of legacy on-premises environments, and you are transitioning to maybe more of a modern cloud operation.
Yeah,
and I think especially in that transition, things probably get even more complex than they were in the old versus the new world.
Yeah, I think so too. That's when I started off this topic. That's when I was thinking, okay, the role has really shifted, because if this is now, let's say, the new way of working, because I mean, definitely from my perspective, I don't want to go back. I was in operations before. We had stuff like physically in a data center and a lot of issues because of that. And I was also on standby. So I physically would get alarms on my phone and I would experience that. So now seeing, let's say, the new order and the new way of working is just a lot better. Ease of mind, trusting what is there and what is established. And we can do a lot more with a lot less, basically, which I think is always going to be great. In that way of working, I feel like disciplines will also evolve, just like security will be. And security will still have a role. And it might be kind of integrated within a team where people that have had that background and now are capable and applying it kind of with them when they create software or are involved in creating software. Or it could still be kind of the specialized focus, because when I'm thinking of still that speciality, there will always be technology that is a bit more disruptive when we think about AI and what kind of 2023 has brought us, or even with the cloud and people that kind of get this toolbox nowadays and just have to do something and are not really mindful of what the right way is of configuring things. I feel like specialized knowledge will always be still valuable there.
No, agree. And I think there it will be interesting to see how to almost compose security teams with, I guess, an idea. I think ideally a bit of a mix on, yes, indeed, maybe you want to have somebody who can go super deep into this technical area. But I also really always admire, and that's, I think, building a little, circling back a little bit to what I mentioned earlier about people coming into security from various different backgrounds.
Yeah.
I think that's something we should cherish and should also actively look for, because if we are thinking about something like behavior of our customers or our colleagues, and we want to maybe do things in a certain way, we can try to figure that out as IT, security, techie kind of people, or we can speak to our marketing department, or we can try to hire a psychologist into the team. And I think that is something that we, again, criticizing my own industry a little bit, we've had sometimes try to position ourselves as these special snowflakes. Like, well, our problems are so complex. Nobody has ever done anything like this before. And sure, of course, there's elements that are super hard, and especially the interaction is very complicated. But when it comes to behavior and especially how people in sort of large in environments interact or behave, there's lots of other disciplines who've studied this for decades, if not centuries. So let's try to also learn a little bit from them and integrate at least the knowledge into our teams, and maybe even some of those people into our teams if we have the space for that.
Yeah, it could be kind of a consequence of being too dogmatic, that it also diminishes trust if you still have a security department from other departments looking at that department. If people are continuously dogmatic, if they also maybe are not aware, or there's a lack of understanding and maybe a lack of patience to explain, that's when I feel like friction kind of builds up. Yeah. And then it becomes this kind of checkbox that people have to go to, and the people that check are then the security department.
Yeah, and the friction might be a great starting point, of course. But indeed, I think it's often then easier to indeed get into the sort of, okay, we come together, there's a bit of friction, and we divert again without meeting. And maybe you should indeed use that friction to have these useful dialogues on, okay, maybe you're a little bit old-fashioned, maybe putting it, not a great way to put it if you want to get into a constructive dialogue, but maybe you are adhering a little bit to an older approach. We come at this topic from a new perspective. Let's sort of see how we can get into a useful way of cooperating here.
I think so too. And to build on top of that, I was wondering, because I always had this notion that when I came into the software engineering field, I would be, let's say, creating software probably 80% of my time. And nowadays, I'm mostly trying to figure out what the right problems are, aligning with my team to make sure everyone is aligned. And then the execution part is like not as much, definitely not 80%. And it's hard to put a percentage on that because it has ups and downs. but still it's a lot less of work than I thought it would be. The bigger the team, the less coding I'm actually doing, and the more I have to align with the team to get everyone kind of on board and have a shared understanding. And then investment kind of pays off the bigger or the longer we work as that team. Have you seen that with security as well? Because I don't have that insight from behind the scenes, how much kind of the human factor or human dynamics plays into the day-to-day.
Yeah, it's. I guess I would similarly struggle to put a percentage on it. Trying to think if it's. I think it's again, indeed, traditionally been a lot of focus on the more, the mechanics. I think it doesn't. Well, yeah, depending on your perspective, doesn't help that the field does have security does have this notion of we have whatever standards checklist that you have to adhere to. So I think that automatically gets you a little bit into this. Okay, let's just start working off against the standard, ticking off the checklist. I think I think security teams that are really performing well are indeed probably doing more of the behavior that you describe, where you are indeed building bridges to other teams, to teams outside of IT and security, and really trying to understand what's even the business we're in. How do we make money? What would be probably the most disruptive thing that could happen to us? And I think building that knowledge really helps you to indeed get away from we need this whatever availability for all our systems, to really understanding we have, I don't know, let's say 100 types of environments. And I understand that 70 of them we could probably do without them for a week. I mean, it would be annoying and people wouldn't be happy, but hey, we'll survive. But here's this 5 things that, we probably can't do without them for a day or maybe not even an hour. And starting to think from those, sort of business understanding, and then pairing that again with the IT knowledge, because then you sometimes you start with, hey, okay, these are 5 systems, but then you ask a little bit further. And then, of course, there's always 2 or 3 systems that everybody thinks are not important, but the 5 important systems will never run if those seemingly non-important ones aren't running. So I think those kinds of, it's a little bit almost like scenario building, and I think that can be really helpful to make sure you are focusing on the right things. But while doing this, because while you are having these conversations, you're also building bridges to those other teams. And you start to see that this kind of thinking, automatically makes its way into the organization. We've had, I've done these kinds of scenario analysis exercises, and you start to see that sometimes you already get to notions of maybe somebody from a business background says, but this is super well protected because there's a 4 eyes principle, always 2 people who have to check this. And then you start to see the IT person who's at the other side of the table sort of pull the complicated face and
squint.
Indeed, squint a little, and later explains indeed that's true, but hey, for this very old system, everybody gets sort of a default password, or it's almost always the same, and that's already very useful. But the other thing is that you sometimes had those interviews, and then 1 or 2 days later, one of those people would come back to you and say, hey, I was cycling to work this morning or having a shower, and I've been thinking a little bit about this business process, and actually I thought of another way in which it can be circumvented, abused, disrupted, whatever it was. And you almost turn the whole organization into sort of this hacker mindset. And if you then have shown with these conversations that you are willing to listen to them and that you're going to do something with their feedback, then all of a sudden you are truly scaling your way of thinking, and you are scaling your security organization. Yeah,
I think that's a great way of doing it. I'm wondering though what the people think kind of going into that workshop. Do they let's say look forward to it, or they go begrudgingly usually, or what is their train of thought?
I guess it would really depend a little bit on the situation, of course, and indeed you have to really carefully explain what the purpose is, so that you're not there to point fingers, lay blame or whatever, because indeed it could very well be that you are talking about an environment that they have maintained for years or maybe even decades, and we're not there to show that they've done a bad job or to make them look bad, so to say.
It's very delicate.
Well, exactly. So there, indeed. So that's probably also a matter where you should, think a bit beforehand on how you want to do this, what the wording will be. Yeah, that's
for me. That's the hardest part.
It is, but it's also I mean, if it works, it's really nice to see, because indeed you start to see this little sort of snowball through the organization, because then of course there's also going to be, maybe you start to have this with one team. And then maybe by the time you schedule the second set of interviews, they already say like, I've been speaking to so-and-so from the first team, and they liked it, or they learned something, or hopefully you get a little bit of a sort of a positive movement around security in the organization.
Yeah. When it comes to the solutions, do you feel like there's still a lot of solutions that are more, let's say, technology focused, where we have to specifically configure something and then it would solve a security risk or concern? Or is it also kind of people focused? Because I feel like, and this might be kind of a cop out, previous conversations, there was always this, okay, we built a very secure system, resilient even, more and more, and that's always going to be a continuous process. And at some point, if people just do what people do sometimes, like that is the unpredictable part. And I feel like that's kind of the hardest part, is educating, bringing awareness, and making sure people have this indeed secure way of working. It's almost going to be quality. I love the way you put it, and kind of professionality in what you do as a professional, I guess.
Yeah, and I think with that, ultimately also having, I think you used the word resilience somewhere in that, also having that in mind when you are building, configuring, designing your system. Because indeed, it would be great if we didn't have those pesky users making a mess of everything, as it sometimes feels. But we really need to, rather than fix the human, fix the system, or at least make sure that the system is as forgiving as it can be. Because we indeed, people will not adhere to instructions. Instructions might be conflicting from time to time. There's going to be time pressure. Stuff changes. Stuff behaves in an unexpected way. There's many reasons why people indeed don't behave as you sometimes would like them to do. I think indeed we need to make sure that rather than pushing people back to the intended behavior, we should build systems in a broad sense, right? Not just systems as in the let's say the box or the application, but also in the interactions between digital and the real world that are forgiving and that are, maybe somehow sounding an alarm if you do something that you're not supposed to do. Ultimately building these feedback loops to learn from it, rather than sticking to how it was and how it should be. Yeah,
I like that a lot. What you're describing really makes me think of kind of a security by default, which is very seamless, right, for the end user. If it's secure and you don't even notice it. And I love the example, I forget who gave it to me, but the iPhone is the best example, where it's just you look at it and your phone opens, and that's basically it. But it scans your face, like it couldn't be more secure.
No, exactly. And that's one of those things where I don't think many of us will still think of security when we start using our phones or our laptops and indeed log on using biometrics. We just start using them, and under the hood there's lots of complicated things taking place. Those kinds of seamless things are, I think, great examples. With the notion that it sometimes might also be nice to introduce. I mean, I'm seamless, as much as possible. I think sometimes it could also be useful to build in some friction at the right places. So I always like the notion of the what's called the IKEA effect.
Okay.
This is apparently I didn't know about this, but I learned this is a cognitive bias where that people place a disproportionate high value, or they assign a disproportionate high value to something that they partially assembled themselves. So
Okay.
you sort of see where the naming comes from. So it is, if you put something together yourself, you value it more than it's justified just by the price of the components, so to say.
The purchase of the end result.
Yeah. So and that notion, building friction, or even having people being involved in maybe putting something together, as small as it can be, can also mean that they indeed value it more. And looking for those kinds of things, Seemless where we can, but maybe sometimes something that we really value, and maybe we should build in a little bit of friction and a bit of a hurdle, because then people might actually be a little bit more careful in that space.
Interesting. I was trying to think of like a good, maybe consumer-facing product that would have that. Because the IKEA principle, I love the way you explained it, right? And I completely agree. When I've built something with my hands, when I've put some time and effort into it, that is my investment. And just by virtue of having invested that myself, I feel like it's just more valuable.
This is also sometimes you shouldn't check all those stories to death, right? But there's also the story that in the sort of the first cake mix that was designed or created in sort of like, I guess, the 50s, 60s. It was like, here's the mix, add water and make a cake, but that didn't feel right. So then they added the instructions that you also had to add the eggs, because then it all of a sudden felt a bit more like cooking, and really, indeed, you would appreciate the value of the cake more.
Yeah.
So that's so it's those kinds of and this is not a digital example, but I think looking for those things, and again, understanding also how people are using products, that's probably a key part there as well. But it's,
interesting. I was wondering if you're coming from, let's say, a security discipline, if that's what you've been doing for the last X years, and there's new technologies and you want to, let's say, either bridge the gaps or kind of expand your skill set, maybe horizontally rather than vertically. What have you seen kind of trend-wise? Do people move towards, because I've seen cloud secure development, for example. I've seen secure software development. I've also seen people that then just focus more on their soft skills side and really try and bring departments together, similar to the workshops that you're organizing, and try and kind of create this secure first mindset in the organization. Those are kind of the trends I've seen, but those are more local. Have you seen kind of similarly those trends?
I'm trying to think. I do think there is building on what we talked about earlier, I think a positive movement where we are, if you have sort of the breaking things towards building in general. I think we are starting to appreciate the sort of the defensive side of the house a bit more, and also still breaking things, but at least doing it in a more constructive way. So you have this notion of, you have a red teaming, which is sort of like the simulated attacks, so to say. Could be technical, also more focused on people, also even physical if necessary.
Yeah.
But then taking that further than just delivering a report, but also working together with what's then called the blue team, the defensive team. And people sometimes describe this in a color mix, like, okay, then that's purple teaming, really breaking things to make the defensive team better, and really doing that in a constructive, working together kind of way. So I do think that's certainly a positive development. I think another, I guess, but it feels like we're still in the middle of that. The whole AI notion is another big one where people are exploring from different angles. Again, using it for defensive purposes, but of course also seeing lots of use cases on how this could be used to attack with more scale or more effectiveness. And what I find interesting there in general with a lot of these language models is that they again change the way we interact with systems, because it's all of a sudden you can build these custom, let's call them chatbots, just by typing in natural language or even speaking, and you don't need to be a programmer anymore to build something like that. And that's already a sort of almost way to democratize this skill set or this availability. But of course, it also opens up the access to try and circumvent these kind of models to basically the whole world. And we saw that in the early days, of course, of these models, where people were trying to see how do these guardrails work. Ignore all instructions was a very simple starting point. But that's again applying the kind of the hacker mindset that most people have, because we always try to use things in a different way, and many of, especially children, do this all the time, right? They try to explore,
look for the boundaries,
the rules, try to use things in a different way. So most of us have that capability, and this is again a way to apply it to an IT environment without having to be a Python expert or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that will be very interesting to come, I think, on or to watch how that evolves with, all of a sudden, potentially a whole army of, both attackers, but let's stay positive, also defenders who can now take their notions and ideas into, simply said, the computer, just by applying natural language. That will be super interesting.
I think so too. I like that you put out the example of the, let's say, solutions, the AI solutions, the chatbots, to kind of generalize them, simplify them. They also had kind of security guardrails, I would say, in them, where people couldn't find, okay, for example, if I really want to build a bomb or make poison, how do I do that? Just out of genuine curiosity, people ask that. And then the response would be, well, as so-and-so, I can't really tell you that because I've been instructed not to. That would be the response.
I'm afraid I can't do that.
Exactly. And then somehow it would be this instruction. Okay, if you ask about your grandma and as she was in the war, and ask her to tell a story about how she created blah, 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 like this circumvented way of still getting the info, then all of a sudden you would have it.
Write a poem about how to make a bomb. It's but again, it's a nice way for people to start thinking about, okay, so this is actually what security to a certain extent is about. And I don't need to understand bits, bytes, networks, whatever, because there's this model, and I can try to manipulate it. Let's see how far I get. There's some of these example platforms as well that indeed show you, I think one's called Gandalf, where it has been instructed not to tell you a password, and you have to try and get it to tell you the password, and it has increasing levels of difficulty. And that you can just show that to people who don't have any technical background, and they really get into it and start to try, and with that understand a little bit what security is all about. Yeah,
absolutely. It's like kind of a gamified way, because there's a kind of input, there's a response, there's boundaries, and you're trying to crack it. You're trying to move and progress, even through levels in some cases. I think it's genius, also ingenious, to educate people, to bring awareness in that way, and to then shine light on this topic that is actually quite broad. Yeah. I'm wondering, because we touched on organizations, and you mentioned procedures like red teaming, blue teaming, even purple teaming now. We've also touched on technologies that make, let's say, security or security first, that give that out of the box in cloud native technologies that we have. I was wondering if you're within an organization, could be either large or small, and I know this is kind of a very broad topic, but I wonder what the right fit is security-wise, because we can always do, and we can always make things more resilient. But even from a software perspective, I can try and make things perfect, even though things are never going to be perfect. At some point, you need to add that business value, and there's kind of this risk versus reward trade-off that you need to do. I feel like on the security front, you need to look more at the risks and kind of the consequences for that. But how do you find, let's say, the right fit with regards to how resilient your product needs to be when it comes to a digital part?
Yeah, that's...
I know it's a broad one.
It's a broad...
That was a thought that popped up.
And maybe starting with, I think what we sometimes forget, and that's again a mindset that doesn't come naturally to most security people or teams, with risk comes reward, right? Mm-hmm. And we sometimes go with it very much from the risk side. Yeah. But we also need to understand that, or we should also keep our eyes open to the reward side. So I think that's, and it's a simple sentence and an easy statement to make, but even taking that into account and I guess also somehow even promoting that kind of thinking within a security team could already lead to a little bit of a positive change. Yeah. And I think if you try to keep that in mind, of course, it depends a little bit on nature of the business and whatever digital products or environment you might have. But there could be many ways where you can look for things where, indeed, sort of switching the dials a little bit on security, and maybe a little bit more from risk to rewards. Yeah, you could think of that, and you could even look for ways to, or even show ways where you say, hey, we've changed maybe the login process on our consumer website, because right now it was, I don't know, let's say you had to create an account with every order, and we had a complex password requirements, whatever, and we saw a certain churn percentage. People were put stuff in their shopping cart, and then they got to the account creation part, and they just abandoned. Maybe we can do something with a magic link where you just you leave your email address, you get send a link to log in for in the future. You don't need to create an account. It's elements. It has elements of security, but it's really close to the actual business. And, so looking for those kinds of things or elements where it's more like maybe coming up with using more biometric passwordless ways of logging into let's say your laptops and your work environment. Maybe you can easily prove that actually leads to reduction in help desk calls, because you might be dealing with password resets or other costly things that your help desk is working on. I think it's constantly looking for those kinds of examples and getting that mindset into the minds of the security team can really help. With that, get into sort of an approach, and maybe you can even formalize that into how you actually pick your sort of priorities and projects, but where you almost make this sort of cost-benefit, risk-rewards analysis, with that indeed accept that, sure, there might be a sort of 100% great technology solution, but nobody uses it because it's super complicated, versus maybe then there's an 80% solution, and everybody gets it. And then if you do sort of a scalability analysis for both, then the net result is probably better for the 80% solution that everybody uses. And that's, I think, a way where this is not super complicated.
No.
But, and we do this all the time for vulnerabilities, which is the interesting thing, because there we always do something like, what's sort of the frequency and the impact, and then you get these green, orange, red risk tables. And doing something similar for the sort of the defensive measures, the fixes, so to say, that could actually really help to also prioritize those, maybe with a bit more of an eye that's a bit more closer to the business side of the house, so to say.
Yeah, I like that you emphasize that it's not really rocket science, and a lot of people can do it. Almost anyone can do it. The only thing that's going to prerequisite is the knowledge of, okay, what are the alternatives and what decisions can we make, and what is then that risk reward.
And I think also the willingness of let's say you are interacting with security experts, the willingness of those experts to also maybe understand that some of their knowledge might also not be applicable to today's world anymore. That's because we do have a tendency to keep adding things, and that's not just security. That's what we do everywhere in business or IT.
Software also,
So sometimes to also say, sure, this indeed made a lot of sense 10 years ago, and we've paid the annual license ever since. But the world has changed, and we actually have 2 or 3 different products or approaches that more or less tackle the same problem. So it actually costs us money, and we get slower. Let's just stop doing that. But that's in many, in sort of the messy reality of especially large organizations. That's not something that happens easily, unfortunately.
No, I feel like maybe that is the harder path, because if there's this notion and this way of working and things are established, like we've always done that, this has always been in place, it must be for X, Y, and Z reasons, because otherwise why would we have it? To then challenge that and to investigate that might be very, very valuable.
It's something as seemingly simple as frequent password changes. Which I would love to say like we used to have, but I think many organizations still have this, but every 60 or 90 days you have to change your password. There's been research and advice by all sorts of by NIST and other standard setting organizations internationally who say, yeah, we've actually found that this doesn't lead to people creating more secure passwords, and also the sort of the threat attack model. There's other ways to mitigate that. So essentially, they are saying stop doing this.
Yeah.
And still, there's still many organizations who are sticking to this from a sort of this is what we've always been done.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it's something that you can easily do. So that's another sometimes another contributing factor. Of course, if it's just a setting, why bother? Just leave it in place but
no one questions it.
Yeah.
If no one does the research, and it even from a logical perspective, if you explain it, it even kind of makes sense how it sounds, right? Because just update it, and then people will never have kind of the, let's say, recent, or it's always different in that way. It kind of makes sense. But then if you actually do the research and say this is rather harmful than helpful, then you kind of have to make that step and that change. But I mean, exactly as you say, I mean, I'm a consultant. I go in and out of organizations, and then I see, okay, for this tool, yes, for that tool, no. Like, it's also kind of not standardized then within the organization. So then I'm like, somewhere it went wrong here, and no one's changing it.
Yeah, and that's again back to what we spoke about a bit earlier. Of course, also it's easy to say if you have sort of a green field, let's configure everything nice, shiny out of the box versus we have decades of sometimes well built, sometimes not so well built things that try to interact with various logon mechanisms, and that's of course also the reality that you have to deal with in many organizations. Yeah,
that makes sense. As a final thought, I was really curious on your opinion when it comes to the education and awareness, let's say, for people that want to learn more about security, or people that want to go deeper, either from a software engineering point of view or even from a completely non-technical side. Do you have any resources where people could look into? Because I know, for example, one of my friends found a website, and there's this, like, again, gamified, progressive way of hacking someone, and he's loving it, and he's learning a ton on the way as well. But for people that are maybe non-tech focused as well, do you have any resources?
Yeah, it's interesting. Trying to think, and in general, I think one of my mantras is we don't need security awareness for people. We need people awareness for security, because I do think that we security teams, and again, the sort of a little bit of a black and white description here, but many security teams don't understand well enough how people interact with systems and environments and all that on a daily basis. And as I said before, try to fix the human instead of build forgiving, really resilient systems. So, but then maybe not replacing awareness by knowledge. I think that it depends a little bit on the sort of the viewpoint you want to start with. I think in general, there's a number of what I think always find very good research reports, which sounds a little bit dry if I say it like this, but so Verizon has the data breach investigations report, which is a very good, very factual analysis of a large data set of actual confirmed incidents. So really drawing on the experience from the airline industry, where whenever a plane crashes, there's an investigation done by a review board, and the report is shared so the whole industry can benefit from it. And with that mindset, this report started by now probably 15 plus years ago. So that's a very good approach to really show, like, okay, if things go wrong, this is what's happening with the attackers. From the outside, was it inside? Was it a mix? What were the industries? What are other trends? And so that's certainly one that I would really recommend. With, I guess, the addition also with the report from our current team from Microsoft, the Digital Defense Report, which is again drawing on the experience of different teams. They're not only doing incident response and monitoring, but also building products. Again, showing a number of trends we're seeing, a bit of recommendations as well. So that's another one that I would certainly recommend. And with that, and I think another maybe two sets of thinking are more I guess also building a little bit on the resilience and approach. That there's a person, a professor that I really like a lot, who's called Sidney Dekker.
Okay.
Who's a Dutch safety researcher, but who also happens to be a pilot himself. So he has a lot of experience in the aviation industry. And he is one of the main thinkers in what is in the more traditional safety space, really focusing more on the role of the human, so to say, and getting less into a compliance-driven control approach, but more empowering people to make the right choices with the knowledge they have available at that point in time. And,
nice.
And he has a lot. He publishes a lot of books, as he says himself. I write them faster than you can read them.
Wow.
But he so there's one that's called Behind Human Error, where human error is in air quotes because his approach, he says, human error doesn't exist. That's always a systemic problem leading to a human making a certain decision that we then label an error in hindsight. So that's one I would recommend. But he also has another one which I think is called the Safety Anarchist, which so and if you're not that much of a reader, check out his website, because he also has a couple of short mini documentaries where he tries to apply this kind of thinking to other industries. So not just traditional safety aviation, but also, for example, the hospitals or supermarkets, where they really try to do actual research in how much of these compliance rules can we take away, and does that then lead to and it does actually in many cases lead to not only better safety records but also better business outcomes. So that's a really interesting notion.
Those are very valuable. Yeah, those insights.
And to then, because that's not directly security, of course, that's sort of that I then try to apply to security. But there's another book by Kelly Shortridge, which I think it's called Security Chaos Engineering. Maybe title might be a little bit off there. But if you check out her website, Kelly Shortridge, she has a great blog as well, which tries to apply again a lot of this kind of thinking, resilience thinking, a little bit of the safety approach to security. Yeah. That's another one that. Maybe they're not necessarily sort of a security one-on-ones, but at least they, I think, are good starting points to try to get this kind of thinking into how to look at security. Yeah,
it definitely piqued my interest. Also because the industries you labeled like very tangible, first of all, and second of all, is one of my favorite things about being in this industry is that people do the research and then put it out for others to educate themselves, to create awareness, and to then better kind of the industry as a whole is one of my favorite things. And I think it's great for companies to do that. It's great for individuals to do that. It makes everyone better. And it gives, again, this perspective that I'm looking for that. But I think a lot of people are seeking as well to kind of form their own opinion on things. Because otherwise it's just this black box and really kind of hard to work with. And if you have an idea, then at least you have a starting point of a conversation and you can work towards a better outcome. Yeah. I've really enjoyed this, Jelle, I must say. This has been a blast.
Likewise, yeah.
Is this kind of comparable to the podcast you've done before?
But different topics, I guess. But at least I enjoyed the conversation this way. So
awesome. Cool. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing. And then I'm going to round it off here. If you're still listening, leave a comment in the comment section below. Reach out to Jelle and let him know you came from our show. And with that being said, thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next one. Beyond